All right, so we're recording now. All right, our study of plant physiology has revealed that some form of diabetes, okay, so this is abnormal, are due to inability of pancreatic beta cells. So now we have abnormal condition of beta cells. So that would be pathophysiology. So that would be the cause of diabetes. All right, this PowerPoint just shows you that there's still a lot of things that we need to learn, both about anatomy and physiology. And this is showing you the brain's lymphatic system, the depiction that we had up until a few years ago, up until probably no more than 5 years ago, maybe even less than that. Nowadays, we've discovered recently that the brain does have lymphatic vessels in it. So that completely has changed our view not only of the anatomy of the brain and the relationship of the brain with lymphatic system, but of physiology too, because there's an implication at having the lymphatic system reach the central nervous system. And this is showing the GPS system of the brain, which we're still trying to understand. So this is just to show you there's still a lot to learn. Okay, now these right here should be fairly easy, hopefully. You should know the 6 levels of organization of the human body, and you should be able to list them from smallest to largest or from largest to smallest. A few things to note. It does say 6 levels of organization, but as you go through the PowerPoints, there is organelles right here that are mentioned in the PowerPoints. So organelles, which are these structures that are made of macromolecules that make up cells. So it's not on this list, but if you're given a list that has organelles in there, you should know where organelles fall. So let me go ahead and go over the PowerPoints. You should know which are the macromolecules that make up living things, the proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids. Let's see, these are cells which are made of organelles, and so you can see here the organelles that make up cells. Okay, there we go, organelles right here. So organelles are made of macromolecules, and they make up cells. All right. Definitely, obviously, you probably already know these. Hopefully, the 4 different types of tissue in the body. So think of tissue as fabric. So these are the 4 general fabrics that we have in the body. As you move into chapter 4, you will see subdivisions of each of these basic types of tissue. Okay, so that's organs, which are made of tissues. And one thing that these PowerPoints are trying to point out is that most organs are going to have all 4 types of tissue represented in the organ. This is the skin, and the skin is an organ. And the skin, you will find epithelial tissue. You will find connective tissue underneath. You will find nervous tissue. And there's even muscle tissue attached to the hairs in the skin. So that's the relationship between tissues which make up organs. And then organs make up 11 body system. So these are, you should know the 11 body systems, and that's what the following PowerPoints do, is they go over the 11 body systems. When it comes to organs and function, concentrate on the organs and the functions in the PowerPoints. So we may be leaving out some organs, we may be leaving out some of the functions. So you don't have to know the functions or the organs that we're leaving out for test purposes. For test purposes, just know what's in the PowerPoints. So the integumentary system is essentially the system that comprises of the skin, which is the largest organ in the body, and then all the other accessory structures, nails, hair, glands, etc. Should be able to come up with the functions of the integumentary system. Protection is the obvious one, and then receptors so that we can sense pain and heat and touch. This one right here is important because we will come back to these not only on this chapter, but also on chapter 5 when we look at the integumentary system. So the skin is one of the important organs that regulates body temperature, which means that if we have an increase in body temperature, the skin will be directed to help to bring the temperature down. If the temperature is low, the skin will help to conserve heat, so as to try to bring the temperature back up. So this is one of the organs involved in what's called thermoregulation. Skeletal system, this is another one of the systems that we're going to cover this semester. Notice that ligaments, which are the structures that connect bone to bone, are part of the skeletal system. Know the functions of the skeletal system, which again, most of them, these first two are pretty obvious. This one may not be so obvious to everybody. Inside bones is the tissue that makes blood cells. So the bone marrow, the red bone marrow. A muscular system, again, this is the system that comprises skeletal muscle. As some of you may know by now, we have three different types of muscle: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. The muscular system only includes skeletal muscle, and then the structures that bind skeletal muscle to bones or tendons, or skin, which are tendons. So ligaments bind bone to bone, tendons bind muscle to bone. So keep ligaments and tendons straight as to which one belongs in which system. Function of the muscular system, I think this one is fairly, obvious. That's probably the one we would think of when we think of the skeletal of the muscular system. The other two functions is it generates heat. So this is another organ involved in thermoregulation. However, in the case of the muscular system, muscles are involved only when we have hypothermia, when we're cold. Then muscles will help to warm us up by shivering. The other function of muscular system is to help not only maintain, I kind of messed up here. What I was talking about when I was explaining about thermoregulation, it referred to this function right here. Helps maintain body temperature. So especially during hypothermia, which means that when we're cold, the muscles will move, will shiver to bring the temperature up. Generates heat. What that means is that the muscles, through muscle movement, are the organs that create heat, that keep the body's temperature within the normal range. So our temperature is created by skeletal muscles. So they are the furnace of the body that creates temperature, heat. Okay. Nervous system, again, we'll have several chapters at the end of the semester on nervous system. Know the organs, know the function. This is a simplified but yet very good summary of what the nervous system does. So the nervous system essentially collects information through receptors, sends the information to a control center, which is typically the brain and the spinal cord, and then directs responses as an output of the information that it receives. So those are the systems we're going to cover this semester. You do have to know the remaining systems, however, and just again concentrate on what's in the PowerPoints. So the endocrine system is comprised of organs that make hormones, and hormones are chemicals that are secreted into the blood. So that's the key to hormones, that hormones are secreted into blood. Organs that you need to know that are part of the endocrine system: pituitary gland, thyroid gland, pancreas, adrenal glands, ovaries, and testes. Note that some of these organs, like the pancreas and the ovaries and the testes, are also part of other systems. The pancreas is part of the digestive system, ovaries and testes are part of the reproductive system. So remember that some of these organs of the endocrine system also belong to other systems. And again, this is just a short list of these organs. There are more, and we're just not going to know them now. We just need to deal with that next semester. All right, so this is a depiction of where we find these organs that we mentioned. Circulatory system, again, know the organs. Notice that blood isn't considered an organ. Then we have the function. Make sure that you you know, the function of the circulatory system, which is essentially transport of oxygen and nutrients. This right here, again, we're back to thermoregulation. Okay, so you have a question. Go ahead, Veronica. Do you have a question? All right. Okay, if you have a question, go ahead and either write it down or turn on your microphone and ask.
Okay, my question is, so the only four systems.
All right, otherwise I'm going to go ahead and keep going.
Oh.
Okay, so now we're up to three systems, involved in thermoregulation: integumentary system, the muscular system, and the circulatory system. And the circulatory system is involved in thermoregulation because blood vessels are going in the skin are going to constrict, shrink when we're cold in order to keep the heat, to keep blood in the center of the body. By the same token, if we are hot, if our temperature is high, then the blood vessels in the skin are going to dilate or enlarge in order to send blood to the question. I'm sorry, I'm reading that somebody asking a question, but I don't hear anybody asking a question. Okay, so if somebody's asking a question, please try it again. Okay. All right. Or maybe even write it down, perhaps. Okay, so when we are, what are the four systems we need for this semester? Actually, for this chapter, you need to know all 11, but this semester we're going to cover the integumentary system, skeletal system, muscular system, and nervous system. And the rest will be covered next semester. However, for chapter 1, you need to know the basic functions and organs of each of the 11 systems as described in the PowerPoints. Okay, so even though we're only covering 4, you still have to know about the remaining 7. So anyway, so just again, we're going to come back to thermoregulation actually here in a little bit. So far, 3 systems involved in keeping our temperature at homeostatic levels. Okay, so here we go, a question about ligaments. You should be able to answer that one as to which system ligaments are part of. Which body system generates heat? We just covered that one. Pituitary part of which system? Again, just go back and figure that one out. Shouldn't be too hard. Long-term changes in the body. Okay, now this one is not a fair question. So because I didn't talk about these. So this is changes in the body. There's 2 systems that direct other systems to act or not act or to change them. That will be the nervous system and the endocrine system. So when it comes to communicating to other systems and to change the function of other systems, the nervous and the endocrine system are going to be the ones that will do that. Difference between them is that the nervous system is very quick, the endocrine system takes longer, and the effects last longer. So in the answer to this question is endocrine system. It directs long-term changes in the body because hormones take time to travel through the body and take time to eliminate from the body. So the change may take a little while to be enacted, but it will also last longer, whereas the nervous system is very, very quick. Okay, distributes oxygen, and I guess the word distributes or transports is the key there. Here, blood vessels are considered organs. Remember that, so you should be able to match them with the system that they're part of. Help us conserve or lose heat. Okay, so the body system that helps us do both, either conserve heat or lose heat. Again, not a fair question because you could argue 2 systems. The circulatory system the blood vessels of the skin are going to shrink or enlarge depending on whether we need to conserve heat or lose heat. However, because these blood vessels are in the skin, the integumentary system could be said to do that also, because skin blood vessels are going to dilate or shrink depending on whether we need to lose or conserve heat. So this one is not a clear-cut question. You could argue both answers as being correct. All right. Okay. Oh, and just to note, in this case, the muscular system helps us conserve heat or generate heat. So it helps during hypothermia only. It doesn't help us during hyperthermia. All right, so wrapping up these systems, lymphatic, again, just know the organs, know the general description, the function. One note here is spleen. People forget, students have a hard time with the spleen. Remember, the spleen is part of the lymphatic system. The thymus is a bit of an obscure organ. We don't talk much about the thymus. It's a little gland right there, which is located on top of the heart. Typically is never depicted when they show a heart or when they show a torso. They never put the thymus there. So it's a kind of like a forgotten organ. And so you don't forget it. It's part of the lymphatic system. Also note that this lymphatic system's one of the functions is immunity. So the lymphatic system is also the immune system. Okay, I don't know, this is all scrambled. This happens, I don't know why. Respiratory system, again, go for the organs and the organs that are listed. The alveoli are little air sacs that are found in the lungs. So air is going to be breathed in and sent all the way into the lungs, into the alveoli of the lungs, or air sacs. Digestive system, okay, you should be familiar with most of these organs. Again, liver is another organ that gives students problems. Remember that even though it has many, many functions, it is classified as part of the digestive system. Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention here is that the pancreas is also part of the endocrine system. Urinary system, again, go by the functions and the organs. I know you cannot read the function. We only have a couple of functions listed. The kidneys have, actually the urinary system has more functions than the ones listed. You only need to know the ones listed. Okay. And again, reproductive organs, just remember that the testes in males and the ovaries in females are also part of the endocrine system. So as far as organs, as the ones that we looked at, the organs that are part of two systems are the pancreas, ovaries, and testes. Okay, so organ system that removes carbon dioxide, that's CO2, that will be the respiratory system. We breathe it out. Spleen, again, remember that's a forgotten organ. Remember that the spleen is part of lymphatic system. Now, we didn't really talk about these in the function, but when it comes to balancing pH, that has to do with hydrogen ions, losing hydrogen ions or retaining them, and that's going to be a function of the urinary system. But again, it's not mentioned in the PowerPoint, so it will not be in the test. Liver, again, you should know which system the liver belongs in. Ovaries are part of two systems, again, endocrine and reproductive. And okay, so again, remember this chapter jumps from one thing to another. So the next thing that the chapter is going to look at is, again, homeostasis. And I was going to take a little bit more of an in-depth look at homeostasis. So some of the things that keep changing in the body, we call variables. So examples of variables will be blood pressure, temperature, blood pH, heart rate, blood glucose, blood calcium. So there's a long, long list of variables that the body has to keep within a certain range in order to maintain homeostasis. And this is how homeostasis is typically depicted. It's not a set point, but it's a range of normal values. And as long as the body keeps within that normal range, then it's kept in homeostasis. So in order to keep homeostasis, the body has to monitor the variables, and it does so by means of neurons, which are cells of the nervous system that we call receptors. So the receptors are going to detect changes in variables. So detect changes or stimuli in the variables. So some receptors detect changes in temperature, others detect changes in blood pressure, changes in levels of oxygen in the blood, etc. All right, so the information is going to be collected and is going to be sent to a control center. So the receptors are going to collect information about the changes, and the information is going to be sent via nerves to the control center. Usually the control centers are going to be the brain and the spinal cord. The control center receives the input and is going to integrate it, meaning it's going to make sense of it and decide whether a response is needed. If a response is needed, the response is going to be sent out via nerves to effector organs, which are not part of the nervous system. And the effector organs are going to act out a response. Effector organs are always muscles, whether it be a skeletal, a smooth, or cardiac muscle. Effectors are also glands. So glands and all three types of muscles are going to be effectors, meaning they're going to act out a response. So the response can be muscle contraction. It can be secretion of sweat or hormones, increased contraction of the heart or decreased contraction of the heart, contraction of a smooth muscle, which may dilate blood vessels or constrict blood vessels, etc. So this is the perfect example that is depicted of homeostasis, and that is that of temperature. So this is called normal body temperature. Let's say that the temperature begins to rise in the body. That will be hyperthermia. The receptors are going to sense the increase in temperature. Receptors are found in the skin and in the place in the brain called the hypothalamus. The information is sent via nerves to the control center, which in this case is actually a place in the brain called the hypothalamus also. And the hypothalamus is going to direct via nerves a response. The response will be acted out by sweat glands in the skin, which is going to start to sweat in order to cool the body. The response is also going to go to smooth muscle in blood vessels of the skin, which will dilate, and in the increase in the size of the blood vessel will allow more blood to flood into the skin, and heat will escape through the skin, cooling the body off and hopefully returning it to homeostasis. So you should be able to identify the receptors, control center, and effectors in a system like thermoregulation. Okay, so the response that the effectors carry out, so this response right here is what we call the feedback. So the feedback is the response that is going to either return the body to homeostasis or is going to increase the change depending on what the body needs. So the feedback can most of the time reverse the change. So this is the most common regulatory mechanism, is going to bring the body back to normal. It's called negative feedback because it opposes change, and this is a quick response to restore homeostasis. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let me go back to these later. Okay, so we're going to talk about body temperature here in just a second. Let's talk about something else now, just to change themes. Let's talk about blood pressure. So let's say that all of a sudden the blood pressure in the body begins to increase. The change is going to be detected by receptors. We have receptors for blood pressure in some of the large blood vessels. So the receptors will detect the increase in blood pressure and will send that information to a control center in the CNS, the brain. The brain is going to receive the information and put out a response, which is the feedback. The response will go to the effector organs. In this case, the effector will be cardiac muscle, and the heart will be stimulated to decrease its beating, decrease heart rate, and the decrease in heart rate will make the heart beat slower, pumping less blood. Less blood is going to mean a lowering in blood pressure. So the change, the increase in blood pressure, will be reversed back down to a normal homeostatic blood pressure. So this is negative feedback because we restore homeostasis. So that is why we say negative feedback is the most common feedback mechanism of the body. Because when there is a change away from homeostasis, the common sense response would be to return the body to homeostasis by reversing the change. So this example, these feedback mechanisms we're going to see over and over and over again, especially next semester. Not so much this semester, but this semester you should be able to recognize an example of negative feedback. And these are some of the examples right here. Feedbacks are typically a loop. So we have the stimulus detecting the change, actually the sensor detecting the change, which is the stimulus, sending the information to the control center, which puts out a response by the effector, and the response seeks to stop the stimulus, stop the change, and return the body to homeostasis. So that's what these loops are going to mean. Okay. So this is the example with thermoregulation, which we've already talked about. In cases when the body temperature goes up, the information is detected by receptors, which send the information to a control center, which sends the command. And in this example, they're giving you only one effector, sweat glands. Now you know there's more. There's the blood vessels in the skin that are going to dilate, become bigger to lose more heat. But in this example, they're only giving you one effector, which are sweat glands that will make us sweat, that will cool off the body, and our temperature will go back down to normal. So it was right here, so now we'll go back down to normal. Okay. In the case of hypothermia, now we have low body temperature. The receptors will detect the low temperature, give the information to the control center in the brain, and the control center will send out a negative feedback response to the effector, meaning in this case skeletal muscles are going to begin to shiver, and that will bring the temperature back up to normal. So again, negative feedback. So there are lots of examples of negative feedback. This is blood pressure. That's the receptor here in the aorta, sends the information to the brain. The response to the cardiac muscle is to decrease heart rate if blood pressure is increasing in order to reverse it. If the problem was low blood pressure, then the response would be the opposite. It would be to increase heart rate. So under low blood pressure, the information is sent to the brain, and the response will be to increase heart rate by the cardiac muscle. Okay, so you should be able to identify these kinds of examples, know what an effector is, what's the control center, what are receptors. So after a meal, the levels of blood glucose go up because we just eaten, so now we have high blood glucose. So that's a change from homeostasis. Sorry, glucose. Okay. So in order to return the body back to normal, the body is going to need to lower blood glucose levels. All right, so if the blood glucose is high, and the response is to send out a hormone that is going to reverse that change and lower blood glucose. This is an example of reversing a change, so it is negative feedback. And identify the body systems involved in glucose regulation. If nothing else, you should definitely come up with endocrine system because of the hormones, circulation because hormones circulate in blood, and so those two for sure. Okay. All right, so very quickly, positive feedback, that is very, very rare. We only have a handful of examples. A positive feedback is going to increase the change instead of eliminating the change. It's going to make it, it's going to increase it, exacerbate it. Negative feedback mechanisms have to be short-lived responses, otherwise they become harmful to the body. There are 3 examples of positive feedback, blood clotting, labor, and inflammation. You should know that. And essentially, one of the best examples is labor. Right before labor, we have, let's see where we're going to start. Okay, so we're going to have secretion of a hormone called oxytocin. And that's because of the pressure that the baby's putting on the birth canal in the uterus. What oxytocin does is it is going to stimulate muscle contraction in the uterus. So the uterus will begin to contract, pushing the baby further into the birth canal. As the baby goes out into the birth canal, it puts more pressure. So we're going to have increased pressure. The increased pressure is the information is sent to the brain, to the control center, and the result is more oxytocin being secreted. More oxytocin being secreted means more contractions in the uterus, which means more pressure. More pressure, the response to that would be more oxytocin, and more oxytocin creates even more pressure. So we have more pressure, more oxytocin, more pressure, more oxytocin, and etc. And you have an example of a positive feedback mechanism. You can see how positive feedback mechanisms must end or they become harmful to the body. I mean, they all must end. The other examples are inflammation and blood clotting. Again, inflammation is a positive feedback mechanism. It must end, otherwise inflammation will become chronic, which is extremely harmful. So it has to be short-lived and acute. Same thing with blood clotting. It has to be short. It has to end. Otherwise, you end up with a humongous clot that can block circulation. Okay, so you should definitely be able to recognize examples of positive feedback mechanisms. All right. And that's just an explanation of childbirth. All right, the last part of chapter 1 is actually quite boring. It's just memorization. You do have to memorize anatomical terms. There's just no other way. This is just a little introduction on how medical terms are put together. You're not going to be tested on these. This is just for information purposes. You do have to know, and this is also important for lab because this information will be part of the lab practical also. You should be able to tell right and left in a structure. And remember that when it comes to right and left, we're always talking about the right and left of the subject, never your right and left. So in this case, this is right, this is left. Okay, so you need to get used to immediately figuring out what's right, what's left, because you're looking at right and left of the subject. The other point is the term supine and prone. They have 2 meanings. We use supine to describe palms up and prone to describe palms down. We also use the terms to describe the entire body laying face up or the entire body laying face down. So you should know that. do know the directional terms. And when it comes to using the directional terms, if you have problems on how to use them, best thing to do is to know the definition of the terms, so that if you substitute the definition for the term and you're not using it correctly, you'll catch it. So for example, if you're saying that the ears are blank to the eyes, okay, and you're saying, okay, the ears are blank to the eyes, all right, so here are the ears, here are the eyes, and if you describe the ears with respect to the eyes, let's say that you're going to put down that the ears are medial to the eyes, all right, well, let's say that's true. Medial means closer to the midline. All right, if you say the ears are closer to the midline than the eyes, well, that's not true. This is the midline. The eyes are closer to the midline. So that's obviously not the correct term. All right, the ears are lateral to the eyes. That makes sense. They're farther from the midline than the eyes. So that would be a good term to use. Superior and inferior, not really. They're pretty much the same level. So that wouldn't be a good one. Lateral would be a better one right there. Okay, that describes the position of the ears with respect to the eyes. So do that. If you're having problems, substitute with the definition. A couple of other points. Proximal and distal are used to describe, it says linear structures. That's true. We typically use it to describe structures in the upper limbs or lower limbs, because really what proximal and distal refer to is the position of something with respect to the trunk. So you can say that the wrist is distal in regards to the elbow, for example. So the elbow is proximal than the wrist. Okay, you can say that the what else? The wrist, on the other hand, is proximal to the pollex or thumb. So it is always in respect to the trunk as proximal or distal. The other point here is anterior and ventral and posterior and dorsal. In a human being, because we stand up upright, the terms anterior and ventral are synonyms. Ventral means the belly, so the belly is anterior. So in a human, the belly is anterior, therefore ventral and anterior are synonyms. Dorsal means backbone. So in a human, the backbone is in the back, is posterior. So that's why in a human, posterior and dorsal are synonyms. So that's, again, just know the terms and be able to use them. When it comes to these terms, there is just, there's no easy way to do it. You just have to memorize them. Part of the importance of these terms is that they will come back in bones and muscles. So that's part of the reason why you need to know them. So we have examples on how to use them. So the orbicularis oculi, that tells you this is eyes. Orbicularis oris, that tells you is mouth. Buccinator muscle, okay, B-U-C-C, that's buccal, that's cheek. So that tells you, okay, that's a cheek muscle right there, okay, right here. Mentalis mentis, that is chin. So that, again, knowing the terms allows you to identify muscles and parts of bones a lot easier. So this will be the orbicularis oculi, orbicularis oris, buccinator, and mentalis muscles. And any book you have will have a depiction of the human body with all of the anatomical surface terms. There are some we're not going over, like this one right here. We don't do the sural either. So just go by the PowerPoints. Okay. And the ones that I have in the PowerPoints are the ones we're going to use again, especially the ones that are bolded are the ones that you really need to know. Let's see, what else? Inguinal, pertaining to the groin. Actually, it means the part where the lower limbs attach to the trunk. That's where the inguinal area is. Let's see a few more points here real quick. Okay, so Again, hopefully this is self-explanatory. That's navel, inguinal, groin area, gluteus, the buttocks, and pubic area, the genital area. Axillary, meaning the armpit. Okay, brachial. All right, let's go for brachial. And antecubital and carpal. So when it comes to an antebrachial, for that matter, all these are terms of the upper limb. So let's make sure that we understand where these are located. The brachial area is the area between the shoulder and the elbow. That's what we call the arm. So that's the brachial area. The antecubital area is the anterior aspect of the elbow. The posterior aspect of the elbow is called the olecranial area or olecranon. The antebrachial area is the area between elbow and wrist. And then obviously this will be the carpal area right there. Okay, so just keep those parts of the upper limbs straight. The antecubital area will be anterior, the olecranial area will be posterior or dorsal. By the same token, in the lower limbs, this will be the femoral area. What we call the leg is this part right here. The patella is at the front, the popliteal area is in the back. So dorsal versus ventral. And then obviously we have the tarsal area, the calcaneal area, which is the heel. So all these are important terms that are going to come back. The other one that you should definitely know is the tip of the shoulder or acromial area, which is in here someplace. Yeah, I guess acromial area right there. All right, so just go over these and learn them. And I do know it's not easy, but it will help later on when we're learning bones and muscles. So the acromion process, this will be in the shoulder, brachialis muscle in the arm, axillary artery in the under the arm. So carpal tells you that's wrist. Let's see. Yeah, know that the pollex is the thumb and the hallux is the big toe. Notice that digital pertains to both toes and fingers. Okay. Okay, we don't do sural anymore, so you don't have to worry about that one. All right, regions and quadrants, those should be fairly easy. These are just ways in which we subdivide the abdominal pelvic cavities. One thing to note is that, let's see, quadrants, yeah, a couple of things here. Quadrants are easy, just 4 of them. And we do use the acronyms more so than the entire name. Do know the organs we find in the quadrants, the important organs. So notice that most of the liver are going to be in the right upper quadrant. The spleen will be stuck to the left upper quadrant. The appendix will be in the right lower quadrant. And the urinary bladder is split between right and left lower quadrants. When it comes to regions, we have more of them. So we have smaller areas. So the spleen is, sorry, not the spleen, but the liver is between 2 quadrants, the regions, the epigastric region and the right hypochondriac region. So note that the spleen is on the right side, the liver is on the right side, the spleen is on the left side, okay? And that's nice. The spleen is only in 1 quadrant, the left hypochondriac region. I keep saying quadrant, sorry. Region. And that brings me to one point I want to make. Don't make the mistake I'm making. Do not confuse regions and quadrants. Read the questions carefully. If the question asks for a quadrant, answer quadrant. If the question asks for a region, answer region. Okay, so don't get it mixed up. So again, the spleen is nice because it's always in only 1 region or 1 quadrant. The stomach is again kind of divided into 2 regions, epigastric and left hypochondriac, with most of the stomach in the epigastric, just like the larger parts of the liver are in the right hypochondriac regions. Urinary bladder is nice in only 1 region, the hypogastric region. Another way in which this information may be used is we may use it for directional terms. So we can say which is the region that is immediately superior and lateral to the umbilical region, okay, superior, and let's say right lateral, okay, right lateral, that will be the right hypochondriac region. Which region is medial to the left lumbar region, okay, that would be the umbilical region, okay. So sometimes we use those terms to play around with anatomical terms. We use the regions to use them in anatomical terms, okay. All right, so that's just explaining the reason why the regions are called the way they are, where the names come from. So most of the liver is found in the right hypochondriac region. The spleen is in the left hypochondriac region. When it comes to quadrants, the liver is in the right upper quadrant. The spleen is in the left upper quadrant. Okay, know the planes in which the body can be subdivided. And again, if you concentrate on the definition, you'll be in good shape. All right, what else really quick? Almost through here. Yeah, this is just showing you that the terms longitudinal refers to a section cut in an organ, elongated organ, along the long axis, whereas a cross section is along the short axis, creating a circle. So this is more lab material than anything. So if something separates the urinary bladder between two equal right and left portions, well, the urinary bladder, this is right here, the urinary bladder more or less. If you were to separate it, cut it in this plane, which will give you an superior and inferior portion, you're gonna have two sections, but they're not gonna be the same, and they're not gonna be right and left. So this will be a transverse plane. That's not the correct answer. If you cut them in the coronal plane, now you're going to have an anterior and posterior portion, and that's not what the question is asking. The question is asking right and left portions. So the answer, and it says equal, so that will be a mid-sagittal cut. That will give you two equal right and left portions. Okay, and then we get to cavities. And let's just go for pictures. Definitely be able to identify the cavities in a picture. You should expect to do that. These will be the dorsal cavities, cranial and vertebral. And then when it comes to the larger ventral cavities, we have the thoracic, which houses the lungs and the heart. The abdominal pelvic cavity. Note that there is an actual muscle, the diaphragm, that separates thoracic with abdominal and pelvic cavities. There isn't a muscle separating the abdominal and the pelvic cavity. The separation is anatomical, is not a physical separation. The thoracic cavity is subdivided into right pleural cavity, which is where the lungs are located, and left pleural cavity, where the left lung is located, and then the mediastinum in the middle, which is where the heart is located. So make sure you can identify cavities and the organs found in the cavities. Do know the organs that are mentioned that are found in the abdominal cavity and in the pelvic cavities. Okay. Definitely know these. Which cavity houses the liver, which in this case will be the abdominal cavity. All right, and then we have serous membranes, which refers to membranes, double membranes that cover organs. So let me go back here. All serous membranes are going to have the same characteristics. They're going to be thin, double layer membranes with one layer touching the organ, which we're going to call the visceral layer, and the other layer covering the cavity of where the organ is located, which will be the parietal layer or parietal serosa. So the pericardium is the serous membrane that covers the heart, and it has the visceral pericardium touching the heart and the parietal pericardium lining the mediastinum. Pleural membrane has two layers. The visceral pleura touches the lungs. The parietal pleura lines the pleural cavity. Peritoneal membrane has two layers. The visceral peritoneum covers the organs of the abdominal pelvic cavity. The parietal peritoneum covers the abdominal pelvic cavity. So do be able to match the serous membrane to its location. Serous membranes are nice because we use them to describe their use directional terms like deep and superficial. So you should know that the parietal serous membrane is superficial to the visceral serous membrane, or you can say the visceral serous membrane is deep to the parietal. Okay, and these are inflammations of these membranes: pleuritis, peritonitis, and pericarditis. Okay, we don't really do imaging, so that is basically it for chapter 1. I could hold another session tomorrow and cover chapter 4, and that way we would have covered all of module 1, since we should be, you guys should be getting ready to take those tests sometime this week, hopefully. So if we can do that, I'll go ahead and set up another session for tomorrow. It will probably be a little bit earlier than today. Might make it at 7:30 or 7. That way I can catch maybe people that perhaps couldn't be today. And again, it will be recorded. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. You have a question,
I know.
Anika?
Yes.
Anikwa?
Yes. Are you able to hear me?
If you're talking, I cannot hear you. So maybe you should write your question, because if you're talking, honestly, I cannot hear you. So go ahead and type your question if you have one. Okay. All right. Give me a second. Let me see if I can do something else. Okay. I'm just waiting a little bit to see if I need to write a question or something. Oh, okay, good. So I have people typing. I'm kind of waiting. Just let's just be a little patient. All right. Yes, absolutely. You can take the lab exam and the lecture by Friday. That's no problem. You can take it at any time, as soon as you're ready. Correct. As long as everything is completed by the end of the semester, you're fine. Just don't leave it all to the last minute, obviously. So according to the suggested schedule, you should be trying to do it. Try to take these tests sometime this week, maybe early next week at the latest. Okay. Okay. All right. So tomorrow we're going to deal with chapter 4, which is tissues, and that also goes with lab. So if you've already taken test 1, you might want to hold off taking the lab practical 1 until after tomorrow. So tomorrow, when we cover tissues, we're gonna look at the pictures of the tissues, and we'll talk about how to recognize them and how to tell them apart. So if you're having problems with that, hold off taking the practical until we cover that chapter tomorrow night. Okay, so we can go ahead and do that. We can go ahead and cover the chapter 4 tomorrow. Again, it will be about 7. Let me see how my day goes. Let's say 7 or 7:30, and probably no later than that. And we'll record the session if you cannot be there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to download the recording, which that takes time, and then I will post it tonight. So tomorrow morning you'll have it already, and it will be just a link that you can copy and paste and retrieve the recording in that manner. Okay. All right. If nobody else has any more questions, I will sign off. Okay, I don't see anybody else typing. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off, and you guys have a good night. Okay. All right, wait just a second. All right, that's nothing. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Good night, guys.